Hello dear guys, this is Anil Kumar Shrivastava. From Mobishala. My app is AKCS 2121. If you want to watch the uploaded videos, lectures, etc., you must download this and thereafter go there and watch all such videos, lectures, etc. We are discussing various topics of the polity segment, that is polity, governance and constitution. As given by the UPSC in its GS paper second syllabus, we are together with, in fact, this one, we are also covering the prelims syllabus, which is polity and governance. Under this, we will discuss various aspects of the constitution. We would also be discussing besides constitution for the prelims, we would be discussing political system, public policy. In fact, these two would be intermediate between polity and governance. Panchayat Raj institutions, rights issues. It would include statutory and constitutional rights. More importantly, statutory rights given by the legislature, not mentioned in the constitution. So we would be discussing all these things under the preliminary syllabus, while under the main syllabus we would be having a discussion on major 8 topics. In fact, there are total 9 topics. There are major 8 topics. I had already discussed about them. Today we are going to take up GS paper second, GS paper second, polity and governance, polity and governance, including Indian Constitution, we will today having a discussion on the historical underpinnings that is background of the constitution and its evolution. We would be discussing this. I would like to tell you that today we will be focusing on the historical background of the Indian Constitution. Let me start it. I would like to tell you Indian Constitution evolved Indian Constitution evolved through history. Indian Constitution evolved through history. It is not that it was parachuted or airdropped one night and suddenly we embraced it. It is, in fact, say it is the evolutionary one that saw the emergence of the Indian Constitution, finally culminating it as its evolutionary phase in 1949, when on 26 November 1949 it was finally adopted by the Constituent Assembly, and it was later promulgated on 26th January 1950. So we would be discussing its evolutionary phase. In fact, there are two views of constitutionalism. I would later discuss the meaning of constitutionalism. One is prescriptive, another one is a descriptive. Under this, things are described only, it is not prescribed, and it traces the historical evolution of a constitution governed by the rule of law. So, constitution basically, constitution plus the rule of law is equal to constitutionalism. Means there should not only be authority distributed to the government or given to the government, but there must be a limit on such authority, on the exercise of such authority. So a system whereby government is empowered to take action for the welfare of the people, in fact, is also limited by its by the rule of law. In fact, the limit is placed on its action under the rule of law, and it gives rise to the concept that we call constitutionalism. So descriptive one traces the historical evolution, that how things evolved. So we are in fact here we will be discussing the descriptive aspect of the constitution. Indian Constitution, it evolved through history. In fact, the process began in 1773, albeit it was in a faint form, in a very, very faint form, because whatever laws were brought to India, in fact, they were meant to serve the interest of the British or our colonial masters. You can say our colonial masters who had been ruling over India, a vast land of India. In fact, its sole purpose was to serve their interest. So let us start it. The faint beginning of rule of law took place in 1773, when for the first time East India Company's activities, administrative, financial, military and judicial, not commercial, were brought under the supervision of under the supervision of the British Parliament. Before discussing how things happened, let me discuss the events that led or that saw the passing of the regulating act by the British Parliament. Let me start discussion on that one. Background to the passing of the regulating act. As the term suggests, regulating act, it primarily meant to regulate the activities of the East India Company, 1773. Let me discuss the background. To discuss the background, we need to trace the structure of the company, of the East India Company, as it was then in the United Kingdom, that is in Britain, how it was formed and how it worked. We are going to discuss that one. Just like today, say there was in fact a board of proprietors, a board of proprietors. Those purchasing a share worth 500 pound, they in fact got the right to vote. Later it was raised to 1000 pound after the passage of the regulating act, but initially it remained confined to 500 pound. So the proprietors means shareholders elected the board of directors, whose number was fixed at 24 under the regulating act. Later, board of directors, they elected board of directors, and board of directors controlled colonies, including the Governor General. Controlled colonies, British colonies or East India Company's colonies. Controlled colonies, with the Governor General being the head of these colonies. However, earlier it was Lieutenant General. Later its position was raised to the Governor General. I would like to tell you, by Governor General means its supervisory authority got extended over the governors of the presidencies. So this was the structure in the United Kingdom, in Britain. In India, I would like to tell you, when the East India Company came for the first time during Jahangir's regime, and Sir Thomas Roe presented a model of how the British company wanted to carry on its trade in India. So then used to be a factory system. Nothing was produced here. It was simply a place or office from where the East India Company in fact managed its trading affairs. So for the first time in say 1612, a factory at Surat was opened. It was an extension of a factory opened at Bandung in Indonesia in 1608. When Thomas Roe visited India, I would like to tell you that it was the year when Jahangir was ruling over India. Akbar had already died 3 years back. So Jahangir was in power there. In factory system was headed by Lieutenant Governor. classes of staff or employees worked there: senior merchants, junior merchants, clerks, apprentices, and factors. We call it in Hindi, it is called adhatiya, that is those who deal in wholesale business, purchase or sale. They perform technical function. In other words, they repaired things that called for technical intervention, and they maintained record. They in fact arranged raw materials while entering into bargain with local rulers or local state officials who in fact were in charge of the local minerals, etc. Senior merchants in fact were called those who were in fact owners, who actually got the raw material purchased in lieu of payments being made, and junior merchant in fact assisted them. They were like modern day cabinet ministers assisting the prime minister. So senior merchants, junior merchants, clerks, apprentices, factors. There were 5 officials, you can say, working under the lieutenant general or lieutenant governor's rule or lieutenant governor's supervision. I would like to tell you, this way the English started their business in India. Later the same factories were fortified in order to defend, make it say impenetrable one, that is in order to defend the interest of the British. When the British started interfering in the internal matters of the indigenous rulers and started practicing politics, or you can say started pitting one ruler against another ruler and taking the side of one ruler to defeat another. So they needed fortification of the factories so that the stronger ruler should not storm it. So in order to make it defensible, in fact in order to defend it, what I mean to say they started doing this, and later they waged open war. For example, in 1757 they fought Battle of Plassey, in 1764 they fought Battle of Buxar, etc. with the indigenous rulers. So this was the structure there, as I told you. Later such factory system was converted into offices, proper offices fortified from around, as the East India Company started recruiting forces, or you can say police personnel or military personnel, so that their interest in India, political and otherwise, could be saved. I would like to tell you, this way they started doing their business in India. By hook or crook they attempted to this one. In this effort they started incurring indemnities. It is called war indemnities. In other words, they started incurring compensation, that they were forced to agree to a particular set of compensation should they be defeated in war. For example, Hyder Ali inflicted heavy damages on the British forces, on the British government, in fact, after the defeat of their forces, when in the first battle of Mysore, the English got defeated. I would like to tell you that this way their exchequer started developing cracks. In fact, they started feeling the burden on their treasury and in order to honor their war indemnity contract or war indemnity word, they approached the Bank of England then. Bank of England then in fact acted as public bank and a commercial bank both. Today it works only as a central bank. Then it acted both as excuse me, central bank and public banks, like today modern day commercial banks. But then they acted only as a central bank. Sorry, say today it acts only as a central bank. Central bank. So they approached Bank of England. Since Bank of England was directly controlled by a committee of Parliament reporting to the Crown, that is the head of state to the British Crown. So parliamentarians had particular interest in defending East India's position, as they were bribed by East India Company say since long. So they attempted to side with East India Company and attempted to prevail over the Crown. But in fact the rival faction was no less strong, and they too attempted to stall the efforts of the pro East India Company parliamentarians there. So the Crown say came under pressure from the opposition as well. So in order to strike a balance, say the Crown decided to bring the activities of non-commercial activities of the East India Company under the control, because in India now the non-commercial activities, that is administrative activities, military activities and juridical activities, they were on the rise. So it was decided to bring the non-commercial activities of the East India Company under the supervision of Parliament, and through Parliament it be brought before the brought to notice of the Crown. So against this backdrop, the Regulating Act was passed. Regulating Act 1773 was passed. What happened here? The Governor General now had to act on the, it was came to be called Governor General in Council, as he had to act on the advice of the of a council then consisting of 4 members. It means if 3 members, in fact it actually happened under the leadership of Malesan, if 3 members say opposed any of the proposals or deals or decisions of the Governor General, things could not move ahead. So it was say 4 plus 1 is equal to 5. It means out of this 3 members consent in favor of the Governor General was needed. However, the Governor General in fact was the GG and Commander in Chief. Were considered ex officio members, because they were not the permanent members of the council, but the Governor General was vested with the authority of casting vote then. So I would like to tell you, supposing that Governor General exercises or exercised his casting vote and 4 members this one, all such members were ministers, then there was no difference between legislature and executive. All these members were to be ministers also. They were appointed as advisor, but they also enjoyed the rank of ministers. In fact, they were ministers heading different boards. Then boards were constituted, not departments. So in order to get majority in favor of a decision, the Governor General has to muster the support of at least 3 members, which did not happen. It created a stalemate in almost all areas, so that the Governor General could not in fact take a decision in this arrangement. That's why later the strength was reduced. Secondly, in order to settle the disputes involving the British subjects in matters related to military, civil and criminal cases, ecclesiastical affairs means religious, related to church activities, religious affairs, a Supreme Court, it is not the precursor to the present Supreme Court. Present Supreme Court, in fact, was for the first time established in 1937 under the provisions of the Government of India Act 1935. Because for the first time in 1935, the Government of India Act envisioned the federal type of government in India. That is, it provided for provincial autonomy. So this was SC at Calcutta. The name Calcutta was changed to present day Kolkata in 2001. So I would like to tell you that SC having 3 judges were to be appointed by the Crown there. In fact, Sir Elijah M.P. was to be the Chief Justice, and 3 other judges. Later the strength was raised to 4, what I mean to say. So barring Chief Justice, there were to be 3 judges, you can say. So Sir Elijah Impe was to be made the Chief Justice, while 3 more judges were to be appointed as puisne judges, means junior, what we call today additional judges in High Court, or say junior judges in High Court. So they were to be puisne judges. I would like to tell you, Sir Elijah Impe, in cahoot with then Governor General of Bengal, that is Warren Hastings, in fact did something that amounted to subversion of law, English law. In fact, the most prominent of such things is the hanging of Nanda Kumar. So that will be told to you by your history, sir. So I would like to tell you that this way, this was the first one, that a council was to be constituted here in India, though expressly it was to assist the Governor General, but in substance, in fact, this did not happen. Rather, they under the leadership of Malesan, 3 members of the council often opposed Governor General Warren Hastings' decisions, thus creating a stalemate or deadlock on virtually every count. This was the second one. Under the third one, the Governor of Bengal, that was Warren Hastings, his position was he was to be elevated to the position of the Governor General of Bengal, having supervisory authorities being extended over Bombay and Madras presidencies. I would like to tell you now, the Governor General of Bengal was made superior to the governors of Bombay and Madras presidencies. So the Governor General, in so far as war and peace and other administrative matters are concerned, not in commercial and other activities, the Governor General of Bengal was given the authority to ask the governors of Bombay and Madras to furnish details or a copy of the decision he and his council had already taken. So this way 3 changes were made, but in fact soon the cracks appeared. The most important weakness, you can say the most blundering you can say weakness of this one was the appointment of 4 members in the council. so that the Governor General was reduced to a status of in fact a lame duck administrator. He could not take a decision say even in important matters because for all the decisions, for endorsement of all the decisions, he needed the support of or majority in the council, which did not happen. Even the area, second one, the areas were not demarcated between what would be looked after by say Diwani, Sadar Diwani and Nijamat Adalat. What I mean to say, in other words, Sadar Adalat was to act as the apex civil court located at Calcutta, and Sadar Nizamat was to act as apex criminal court located at Calcutta. But the Supreme Court often disregarded their decision, did not seek opinion from them on any issue, and rather did anything that in fact were contrary to the principles or to the decisions taken by these courts. So the areas between the governor, between the Supreme Court and these courts, and also between the council and the Supreme Court, were not defined. It created much of the fuss, much of the in fact hesitancy on part of the both. In fact, the Supreme Court sometime say transgressed its boundary, encroached upon the domain of the executive council headed by the Governor General, and this way the stalemate or a deadlock was created. For example, say suppose the Governor General was to punish a civil servant, since as the civil servant was say a British subject. So I would like to tell you that the matter, the civil servant appealed against the decision of the Governor General before the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court overruled it. So this way the stalemate or deadlock was created between the Supreme Court and the Council of of the Governor General. What I mean to say, GG in Council, Governor General in Council. So this way, in order to remove all such shortcomings and in order to clearly define the boundaries and even the rights and duties of the civil servants, which then did not happen, an amending act was to be brought up, but even that failed to address the problem. And finally the Pitt's India Act was say presented and passed by the British Parliament when Pitts was heading a coalition government there. I would like to tell you that in so far as regulating act is concerned, one good thing happened, that for the first time Warren Hastings in 1769 appointed supervisors for the collection of revenues in a land revenue. What I mean to say, in the former princely states of Bihar, Odisha and Bengal, after the Allahabad Pact, under which the English forced the transfer of Diwani to themselves, and Shah Alam II had to eat an humble pie. He had to accept this one. So I would like to tell you that the same in fact supervisors later, 3 years later, means in 1772, they came to be called collectors, and say their service conditions, recruitment, etc. were all in fact governed later by the decisions, or the, you can say, statute that was prepared and released by the successor to Warren Hastings, that is Lord Cornwallis. So that's why Lord Cornwallis is considered the father of the Europeanization, in fact father of Europeanization of Indian civil service. So in fact, though Warren Hastings created the office, but their service conditions, recruitment, etc. were to be in fact decided later, and it happened exactly after Warren Hastings assumed charge as the Governor General of Bengal in 1786 in India. So I would like to tell you there are say two serious flaws in this one. First one, that the Governor General in Council did not cooperate with the then Governor General of Bengal, that is Warren Hastings, in so far as administrative and other non-administrative decisions were concerned, so that a deadlock was created there. Secondly, due to the non clarity of the boundary between or boundary of jurisdiction between the Supreme Court and the Governor General in Council, and also between the Supreme Court and Sadar Diwani and Sadar Nijamat Adalats located at Calcutta, things sometime in fact did not move in the right direction, and they often fought over the jurisdiction or who controls what jurisdiction in fact, and this way a deadlock was created, which made ultimately people suffer because so many of their cases kept on pending. So I would like to tell you these were two serious flaws. There were some other flaws as well. For example, say the Governor General of of Bengal, though he was given a supervisory authority over the presidencies of Bombay and Madras, but the governors of Bombay and Madras did not often, in fact, did not listen to his directions. Rather, they acted in their arbitrary manner. This created problem for the Court of Directors sitting almost 7,000 miles away in Britain. I would like to tell you that this way the functioning of the Governor General in Council and other institutions created under this in fact came virtually to a standstill. I would like to tell you that under the same Regulating Act of 1773, some changes were also made there back at London. For example, the shareholding, that is membership of the Court of Proprietor, what I mean to say, needed or was to be made compulsory only for those who could purchase shares of East India Company worth £1,000. So anyone purchasing share of less value did not have the right to vote there. In fact, though he could be a shareholder there, but he or she could not enjoy the right to vote there. Similarly, in the Court of Directors, I would like to tell you, Court of Directors, their strength was fixed. In fact, under the same act, what I mean to say, it was fixed at 24. So, and they too were expected to work on the basis of the majority opinion. Say after formulating a policy based on the majority opinion, they should in fact implement such policies and ask the Governor General of Bengal in India to do the same, to follow the same. So there were some shortcomings and some provisions as well. Such changes were made in Britain, where I told you that two major changes were made. That the share of the Court of Proprietors was those who in fact wanted to remain a voter or those who enjoyed rights to vote, they needed to purchase a share worth £1,000 so that he or she could get the right to vote there. And on say next one, that the number of or the strength of the Court of Directors was fixed at 24. So these two changes were made there, I would like to tell you. As I told you, corrections were needed in the first act that in fact created a virtual deadlock here, and say a surging debate went on in Britain that what changes should be made. Accordingly, say their intellectuals and members of the Court of Directors started looking for a right man, say to replace Warren Hastings, who in fact after Nand Kumar's hanging was charged with the impeachment, and he faced impeachment there back in London. So about the next story we would be having, or about the next development we would be having a discussion separately. For the time being, keep on watching this. Thank you.